Cool. So the name of the presentation is load testing slash JMeter. Basically, there will be, as you can see, the agenda. I'll be touching upon a few things, mainly 6, and the 7th is yours. Definition, we'll be touching upon, what's load test, load versus stress. Other things like site traffic, concurrent traffic, and JMeter as a tool. Planning your load test, what you need to do, what you need to ask for. Building your load test. There are 2 different ways of building it. There's a, I think it's a beginner's way of building it where you use intercepting, using the proxy to intercept the calls and make your test. And there's also the building it from scratch. I will be touching upon also traffic, throttling the network, and extras. Dry run, load test execution, and the results. And then I'll let you guys ask whatever you can think of. So starting with the definition. So it's really about load test. What you do, you have an application, you put it together, and you're trying to figure out if it survives the traffic that's expected in production. The way we do it really is we have different tools to use that. And the one tool I chose, the JMeter, we'll touch upon it later. But basically, you're trying to make sure that your application can withstand whatever production traffic you have right now and whatever production traffic you will have in the future, if you have any growth in there. Now, moving to stress, and some people call it endurance test. Basically, it's putting your application under for a set amount of time under extreme condition to make sure that the application has a way of it's gonna error, but your application has ways to handle those errors. It's not crashing, it's recovering, and then to identify a bottleneck. And after that, you basically push it till the end limit where the application cannot take it anymore and they basically crash. And that's when you set the capacity of the system. You know how much you can take, how many punches before you fall down. And I just put in there something that you guys read it. I'm a slow reader, so let me know when you're done. I'm not done yet. So next, site traffic, and please let me know if you want me to speak faster or slower. I try to be slower. So as far as the site traffic is concerned, it's really how many users visit your site, and it's on a set of number of days, or basically usually we go by 30 days, and that number is very crucial in building your load test later on. And we'll touch on that, upon that. Now, the more you know about that traffic, the better it is. And so one of the pointers that you need really is how much of that traffic is guessed and how much of that traffic is authenticated, because that helps you in building the scenario in JMeter later. All that, you hit your analytics team. Not every company, I realize, have an analytics team, but we have one. And it's good to hit them up and ask them or solicit that information from them. Unfortunately, sometimes, there has been instances where, there's no time to kind of get that data, or the team is a client's team. So, and it's Friday. So you actually do your best educated guess based on whatever number you have, whatever data you have. You kind of reverse engineer things, and Matt told me, who's in this room, by the way, told me that you actually can hit Google and see what is the analytics like for that site. So that's a good thing to know. You live and learn. So then concurrent traffic, basically, it's not only the traffic that visits your site you care about, it's more like how many people are on your site in a set time. And the next thing you need to know is for how long. The duration of people sitting on your site helps you reverse engineer the number of users you need to load the site with, so you can reach that concurrent user. JMeter is the tool that we're using. It's open source. It's really free, and that's why I chose it. I started with it like really quite a few years ago. I can't recall. The good thing about it is, like any open source, it has a downside. But what I like about it is, the sky is the limit with what you can do. You have access to everything. You can do whatever you want to do, and it will respond. Just like any open source, the report is not that pretty, but you can just import that data, put it in an Excel sheet, create charts with it, diagrams, whatever. So it's more work on your side, but for what it can do, I like it. It actually, and I'm reading here, it helps you create the load to kind of see the capability of the site, reliability, scalability, and also the performance of the site. I actually have used it for other things, like to test if redirects are happening, because you can just hit a whole bunch of URLs and see what response you get, and that response, if it is whatever, I think a 302 for redirect, that means it's in place. So you can really use it for anything. Just be creative. Now, the first really, after getting down with the definitions, the first thing that you need to do when you get the news, when the news is broken on you that you have a load test to do for the week, is that you go ahead and plan your load test. That involves mainly prod traffic. Now, for the prod traffic, what I usually ask for, because really building the load test is not as hard as getting that data. And actually, you may find yourself going in the wrong direction if you don't get enough data, and that's when guesswork happens. So just be very sure to ask these questions, or call for these, or obtain the data that's on the screen, because that can really help you construct an accurate test that would do something similar to production. The first thing I go by is I ask for 12 months of traffic. The reason being is you want to know if the company is growing in traffic or not. So if I'm going to load test their system, that means I want to make sure that if they hit anything that's similar to their peak traffic in production, they can survive. Now, while we're doing this, we're facelifting the site, or we're building different pages on it. We're changing maybe the CMS on it. We're doing a whole bunch of things. Growth happens or not. And if that happens, I want to be sure to include that in one of my load tests. Load test does not fall in one run. Best case scenario, it's really 3 runs. That's if you don't hit a snag. So your first run would be you hit an average. You set your load test to be average traffic. The second would be your peak, and your third would be peak plus growth. And that's when you really add value to the client that you're serving. So if I look at their 12 months data and I see that they're growing at a steady rate of 5%, I need to park that in, and I need to make sure that I test it. Now, of course, I'm going to go overboard, and if that's within the scope of testing, and see if I can do a stress test, and I can load the site more and see when they're going to crash. But sometimes the scope of work is really just going and identifying or hitting those pointers, which is average, peak plus growth. That's mainly what's happening, or what we get asked for, but we're ready to do the other kind of testing. Now, people give you 12 months worth of traffic in the form of 30 days. So it tells you, hey, we're getting 10,000 users a month. Now, the simple math of dividing 10,000 on 30, on 24, on 60, on 60 to get down to the minute, traffic per minute, really does not work, because believe it or not, people sleep 8 hours a day. So your 24 hours is going to skew your test, and you're not going to hit the target that you want. So the next question to ask them is hey, what are the busiest hours of your day? So, I worked for a company where most of their traffic happened between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. So that's 4 hours. So I can't divide. So I can divide the month traffic on 30, and then I have to divide it on 4. 30, then 4, and then 60, then 60. So it's 4 hours. And can you imagine the gap I have if I divide it on 24? Might as well lose my job. You're going to be ill then. That's for sure. So then, once you figure out the user per minute, then you go to the next question, which is like knowing if there's a user journey that they care about. Alternatively, you can ask about the top 10 pages they have. And this is really for you to kind of figure out, like, to be on the safe side, because like you can test any page, but it will be more meaningful if it is a page that is really getting that high traffic, because then you're really mimicking what's happening in production. So you get that top 10 pages, but you also ask how much of that traffic is hitting every page. So you're getting like 100%, for example, that comes to the site. Contact us gets 20% of the traffic. I'm trying to think of pages like about us get 10%. Some article pages get 30%. At the end, you end up with that 100%. Now, if you go and hit every page with 100% traffic, you're not mimicking production. You're testing the living out of the site, that's for sure. But you may get or end up with a breakage. That's a milestone they have not reached yet. So you're testing futuristically. Now, that's not a bad thing, but they may not be ready to kind of beef up their capacity yet. So the best way to do is basically you take it, you create those pages in your JMeter, and then you put traffic controller on every one of them, and you set the percentages to hit every page, depicting exactly what's happening in production. That will ensure that you really mimic production. Now, later on, the next point is guest versus authenticated. What's important about this is not all of your traffic is people that are just surfing your site for the first time. Some of your traffic will be returning users that created accounts, that registered with you. Now, for those, like I had a client where 30% of their traffic is authenticated user, and the 70 is guest user. Now, what I want to know is what pages are visited mostly by guest users, what pages are visited by authenticated users. And sometimes they're the same pages. The experience is different. Like now we have welcome so-and-so instead of just a homepage, What's good about that is anything authenticated hits different systems, has another variable that is added. The new calls are added. And unless you unless you incorporate that with your test, you'll be missing part of the picture, and you may end up like with a fire drill in production. So that's how important it is or how much important it is to ask for this data. Data to be obtained. That's continuation of the previous one. Prod traffic. So the next thing to ask about is mobile versus desktop. Now, more and more people are on their mobile phone. Honestly, I myself, if somebody tells me something, I check on my mobile because it's easier than opening my laptop and putting my password. I'm just putting my finger on my phone, and I'm logged in, and everything is there. So, and I have seen some of the clients I worked on. Really their traffic is higher. 60-65% mobile and 30-35% desktop. So the thing about mobile is what makes it unique is now that you're dealing with a new variable, which is you have somebody on the go, and whether or not their mobile company tells them that they're getting 4G or LT or LTE or whatever, doesn't mean that they're going to get that all the time. We all know that there are dead zones, and Verizon was very good in making a commercial about those. Very, very scary commercials. Now dead zone is something that I'm not going to count for, but I'm going to count for like they're on the highway, they're going to hit some slower networking or network speed than if they're in the office. And most people, when they're in the office or their home, they will be on their Wi-Fi. So, and we know that, Wi-Fi version 1, version 2, most people are on version 1, so I think they're getting 100 megabytes if they're on wireless. at their home or at their offices. So I need to count for that as well. Now, the good thing about JMeter is that there's a user's property file where you can go in, there's some formula there where you can actually mimic, you can throttle down and up or increase and decrease the network speed so that you can make sure that to mimic whatever scenario you think that's going to happen in production. The most important thing about load test really is to know your audience and tailor your test to fit that audience. Like for example, if the client you're working for or the business you're working for has a clientele of mostly they use burn phones. They use Cricket, they use Boost. Those are subprime networks, and best way is to go by a lower. Like if they say 3G, that's a lower 3G. I'm not going to go with a higher 3G because that's any of those terms, 3G, 4G, LTE is a range. I'm going to go with the lower range. If I go with the upper range, I'm putting a risk on missing out on certain number of people traveling or in bad areas, or really just having a crappy phone that cannot process that high speed. So to be on the safe side, I will always go with the worst case scenario. So I think I covered those. And I can also mimic, back to that point, I can also mimic desktop because not everybody is on their Ethernet cable. Some people are on their, honestly, most of the people are Wi-Fi anymore. So I need to make sure that if that creates a challenge, I will mimic it. Mostly not. It doesn't create a challenge. Now I have new versus existing site. Now existing site we already covered. We have people that will tell us, analytics people, we have data that has been collected. So I'm not worried about it. I already covered it, but I just want to kind of have it as a starting point to go to the next point, which is new sites. Now with new sites, you have clients that come to you and say, we do have a business, but we want you to create a brand new site for us. I'll piggyback on the data that I get from that site. Now, if they do not have a site at all, or the other scenario is if they have multiple businesses and they want to combine them in one site, then I have to really combine all the traffic that heads every business separately, because now all that traffic is going to be funneled into one site that represents all that. So now there are clients that don't have a site for that. I ask their business analysts to give me metrics. That's the only thing I can go by. I can go and see similar businesses using Google Analytics and see how they're doing, what kind of traffic they're getting. But that's again, their expectation may be higher. So I need to get their metrics, how many users they're expecting, or they're projecting to hit the site. I want to make sure that I marry that with whatever that's happening in production against a different business. I can communicate it back to them and say, hey, similar business is getting this much traffic. Are you sure? If they're sure, that's fine. I'll go with whatever. But I have to recommend. I would have to do my research, to do my homework, and recommend it back to them. And then there's always a conversation between QA, SD, or business analyst and the stakeholders. And whatever number we reach, that's the number we mimic. Let me see if I covered all these. So next, part of your planning your testing is setting the time and date for your test run. So you need to specify a time and date because everybody knows, maybe not everybody, but when we're doing our testing, we talk to people that govern servers or monitor them, and we ask them to enable extra logging or put some kind of monitor in the back end. So when we're running our test, because yes, JMeter spits out results, but we want to marry that with the back-end behavior. Not everything is going to manifest itself in JMeter, especially if there's like really bad error handling happening. You may get like a 404 for anything that happens. That's not going to tell me anything. If they have a back-end monitor, they may have better reading of what's happening. So I need to make sure that I have that relationship or that setup in place. I need to tell them what time and what date, because logs tend to roll over. And if they roll over, we lost that data. So I want to make sure that either they extend the life of that log, or they grab this data or that log for that specific time, because logs can be long. So I need to say, hey, from this time to this time, from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., I ran this test and on this date, and then they go grab it. Oftentimes they try to grab them before 12 p.m. or 12 a.m. because that's when they roll over. So that's the importance of having a contact person that would need that kind of thing. I think I covered those. Now, moving on to building your test. Do you have any questions? I have a section for questions at the end, but I can take a few.
Do you have any advice on using a test environment to load test in if it duplicates production?
I will never test in production unless the client asks me for it. You know, there's most of the people that I worked with, most companies have an environment they call perf, performance, and that environment usually has, mostly has a copy of production in there. So I'm not testing against like empty pages or like missing assets. Then that skews my results. So I will always test in QA or in perf, whatever environments that dedicated to QA. The testing always happens after hours, because I realize some people still using the environment. You know, an environment most of the time when I worked with teams, there were other teams that were using the environment for their own, like they could be using it for security testing, they could be using for any kind of testing. So I want to make sure that I don't bring them down. I don't slow down their progress, because once I hit the site, it's going to be slow. It's expected. And that could, if timeouts, if they're doing their functional test, they may time out and they may report wrong defects, you know, or invalid defects. So I want to make sure that I broadcast that message that, hey, I'm doing my testing, and it is mostly, I did it 100% of the time, I did it in the after hours. Some of my testing fell between the hours of 10 p.m. and up to 6 a.m. in the morning, you know? So, and to say that it's like you're gonna run your first test, then collect and then your results and run the second and run the third, that's really an invalid assumption. That happened, you know, but most of the time you uncover things that need investigation. You have to, like the last test I did, it was going against really one data pointer, which was how many concurrent users they had. And we had to reverse engineer a whole bunch of numbers and put the whole assumptions in place so that we can run the test. And after 1 hour of the test, it was a stress test. So it was going to go over 4 hours. After 1 hour of the test, I saw no errors. And when I say no errors, anything below 1%, I'm not gonna lose sleep over it, you know, if I'm giving it that load. Of course, I'm gonna collect the errors and investigate them to make sure that I reach the ideal 0% errors. But anything that's above 1%, that's when like we need to stop. You know, most clients expect you to be at 1 or less. So then after 1 hour of run, I realized, you know, I'm not getting any errors, so that means the system is comfortable. So I had to double my traffic to give it the punch that it needed, and then errors happened, and I was very happy.
So are you going to touch on wax and load balancers and how you work around those roadblocks?
Yes, that's actually part of the exercise.
Wonderful.
Let me go to, I'll catch more questions at the end, because I want to make sure, I want to be mindful of Olga's time.
Just mine, everybody's, not just mine.
And everybody's time, but I know you have an agenda, so I want to make sure that I honor it. And in the meantime, please feel free to grab pizza, wine, whatever, you know, beverages you want. So then this takes me to building the test. Honestly, when I first started with load testing, the easiest way was to just kind of, there's a proxy feature in JMeter where you can enable it within your browser, and then you kind of intercept all the calls in a page. You export those or import those into JMeter, and then voila, you have your test. The bad thing about it, you will never run the load test accurately, because everything that happens in that page is listed as its own thread. And to run the load test without skewing the results, because you're running now like 100 or 150 threads, and you're hitting them all with whatever load you think, So that's 100 threads multiplied by 150, if that's the load you're going for. That's huge. And your system is gonna be really going to a slowdown, and you know that your system is not good anymore when you see your time is running in JMeter, but you don't see anything getting logged. That means you're timed out and the handshake in between your system and the server is stopped. So that's the first number one, or the first check mark. I really should have numbered them. So then the second check mark is really what I use. It's basically building your test in JMeter. And I don't know if, like for those that know automation, it's the difference between, developing your test in Selenium IDE and developing your test in Selenium WebDriver, where you write your commands and let it know or order it to do what you want it to do. So that's how I build it. Now, basic structure, not without diving into details, and then I can show you like really the test I have for you guys, is you have configuration elements that tell the test what environment to point to, elements that tell the test to clear the cache, to manage a cookie, to manage headers. All those are configuration elements at the top. And I put them at the top just for visual, because those are not related. They're related, they control the test, but they're not what's happening under the hood. And then you have your thread group, and you can have multiple thread groups. And that's where your pages, journeys, if you have multiple pages, APIs, live. And that's where you set your, how many users, for how long, and for how many loops. And then you have listeners, and listeners is JMeter's way of saying reports. Now you can read them. Now, traffic, network, and extras. Extras really will be on the next page. So as far as traffic, you set your traffic to under the thread group. It's user per minute. What I usually do is I go by 60 seconds. So because my calculation goes down to a minute, so if I have 100 users, it will be 100 users, and then I set the wrap-up time to 60 seconds, and that meets the 100 per minute. Now, you need to avoid skewing your results by adding more machines. Experience showed me that depending on the site, really, this cannot be a number that we adopt, but try to steer away from hitting 350 threads on your machine. Honestly, I usually set it to 200, because one thing you need to know is your test machines are not ideal, so they will have less resources. And reboot your machines before you start, because you never know what happened on them or for how long they have been up. Bring up your task manager and see the performance of your machine. Do not do it during the test, because then you're adding, that's taking resources that your test can use. And then divide your load on multiple machines. If you see that, like I tried it once and my machine got stopped totally. What I did, basically, I stopped my counter, I stopped everything, and now I took that 100 user and I divided it on 3 machines. For the math, let me do 4. It's easier math. So 25 per machine, and then every one of them is ramping up 60 seconds. So by the end of the 60 seconds, I have all 100 in the system hitting it hard. So then you set your target network speed within the user properties. You go in there and you now want to do like 3G. You put that number in place in that formula. You save your changes, you close, and now you run it that way on all the machines that are involved. Sometimes we do both. We do mobile and desktop at the same time. So I will have 2 machines mimicking mobile and 1 machine mimicking desktop if mobile traffic is higher than desktop. So it's really a combination. Or you can just do mobile and then do desktop after that. I prefer to do what production does, what happens there. So I paint it exactly the way it is. So then when you repeat the test, you need to repeat it at the same time you did it. Because believe it or not, sometimes you do the test from home, right? Or you did it after hours when all your coworkers left, and you have all the bandwidth for yourself. But other time you do it during work, you have a new variable that's going to skew your results. Your results are not accurate or not the same anymore. You use different machines. what's the guarantee that that machine now has 16 gigs of RAM versus 5 that you used earlier? Not 5, usually 4, or increments of 2. Now, same time and same network. If you did Wi-Fi, don't do Ethernet. The next time you run it, stick to Wi-Fi. If you do Ethernet, stick to Ethernet. Just do not change the variables on yourself. Now, as far as the extras, now one thing to ask your client or whoever that assigned you the test, is there a load balancer in the front? And a load balance job is really to balance the load, just like the name suggests. And if it is in front of your test, no matter, you're gonna have a hard time breaking it, but you're breaking the load balancer, you're not breaking the site, So that's helpful, that kind of testing. I have done it before, but I mainly help identify configuration issues in your load balancer. So I'm not discounting doing that. Please do it. Suggest doing it. The other part, though, is ask them for a URL that bypasses that load balancer, or if they can turn it off in perf environment. And then you can then head the site, and it's gonna break sooner. But then the weaknesses in your site. You're not actually, I've known clients that cover up the lack of resources in their sites by a load balancer, and this is totally healthy. Like a lot of businesses do that, because that's the job of a load balancer. Now you turn it off, you're gonna start seeing issues, but that's what you do. And then there's another technique for websites to stop serving you if you're hitting them hard with a load test, and that brings me to a point that I'd like to touch. I promised Olga to deliver. Whatever you see, don't do, because those businesses, we're hitting them with one user. We're not hitting them with more than that. You bring a website down, that's not ethical, and I think that's criminal, is it? I have at least one person nodding.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
the security guy says yes.
yes, so be careful. Do it on the clients that that agree that they need it and you could sell it to them, and that will bring a lot of value for them. But if you do it in prod on any site, really, you more than one user, you really you're running into ethics now. So please don't do it. So this brings me to the next point, which this was really the version. Some businesses or some sites, they put like a limit on how many hits can come from a specific IP, and for that, so you run your test, you're all like really fired up, you have your nachos, if you're me, and you have all your, your munchies, your drinks, everything around you, because you're sedative for the rest of the night. Your eyes are the only thing that move really. And then, halfway through the bag and you're thinking that, you're really going to do a good test, you discover that after 100 hits, you're getting errors 100%. And that's because, you're getting denial of service. And I had an instance where, certain website was getting that kind of, they were reporting like really login was failing in certain, at a certain percentage that's above expected or acceptable. And then but nothing was really obvious. Like we tried everything, nothing showed as like the reason. We could not identify the underlying reason. So we suggested that we do that test in production, and we got approval. So note to self, only do test in production when you get approval. So we ran it, and sure enough, after 120 hits, I got denial of service. Made my night very short. I appreciated that, but at the same time, it identified that I can't do more than that. But I'm in production, so I cannot alter production to get results. I have to stick to the production environment. So what we did, further investigation, identified that in dense areas like New York, there is more than 100 phones really, even in our areas, connect to one tower, and they all assume one IP. And if all of them hit our site, or some of them did, and the number exceeds 120, the rest of the 120, 121 and beyond that, will get denial of service. And so we said either increase that number or that should be an acceptable behavior. So that just to show you that the load test is not like cut and dry. Like it's not that, hey, do it this way. And this is why I opened up by saying it's really a journey, because you learn from it. And you, like, every time you get a load test, it's never the same. Every time you get a request, it's a new challenge. It's just a different setup, different blend of spices. And then the good thing is you walk away from with, if I can walk away from it with a lesson that I learned, I appreciate it. If not, then, I just did my job. So that was a very good lesson that, hey, mobile, beware of that, denial of service cause issues. Am I running out of time? Okay. Now, you built your test. You want to dry run it. If you don't dry run it and you wait the night off after everybody's like their hands or they're on their trigger and they're waiting, you may have issues that you should have debugged. You may get errors that were pre-existing in the site, and now you're reporting them as errors that are happening, and that's not correct. So you need to make sure that you debug your script, you run it against one user, and make sure you insert assertions, so you make sure really that the 200 okay you're getting is actually a 200. It's not because somebody did not configure, did not map those messages or those error codes, or just was too lazy to kind of implement or map them all like the way they should, and now you're getting 200 for anything and everything really. That helps you identify, the assertion help you identify that the page really was hit. So what I usually do, I put an assertion that looks for a specific part of the page or a specific text or a specific anything really. And then if I get a 200 okay and my assertion tells me that the page loaded, awesome. Then I can check that that call and say I'm good to go. Now the other thing I can think of is pre-existing errors, like certain pages are missing certain things, like content is missing, or a PDF file is not, because when you're running your load, you basically the way I do it is really also downloads all embedded assets. So if one of them is missing, is going to create an error, and you should know of it and you should notice. So should you run the test, you're going to bypass that. So if you get 100% error, I'm still going to report a success with a defect that, hey, one of your assets are missing, can you please republish or put it in place? Because I already saw that asset in my dry run failing. So it's not my load that made it fail. So then the test execution, and really there's nothing in there, and the results, there's nothing in there. The reason being, I just want to bring up my JMeter and show you guys how to run it and the results. So I was being super honest. And then the QA, but not yet. This is the time I wish I had 2 screens.
Still plugged in.
Can I unplug?
Black screens.
Oh, really? Awesome. Cool. So what I'm doing while I'm being silent, I'm diving into my JMeter instance and I'm firing it up. And I am going to my test scripts and choosing the test I had for this. Okay. Why is it not showing? Can I? Should I take it there? Oh.
That's the. Switching it to English.
Maybe it's, should I just kill my PowerPoint?
Kelly. I'm sorry.
I was just wanting to see it.
That's fixing issues.
Oh, cool.
Unplug, plug in.
Yeah, that one more thing, the hardest issue a reboot can fix and plugging back in. So then I'll show you this. So I named my test load test, which is really, if you look at here, it's a test plan. So that's the name of your test plan. So if you're doing this client or that client, just name it accordingly. This field really can be anything and everything. It does not affect the test. So then under here, the first few are really, so 1, 2, 3. These are our configuration, new configuration, and there's like load of them you can add. Like here. See all these, and I have not used all of them yet. So someday I will. Is it too small?
Oh, I don't have my glasses, so I can see here.
How about now?
Oh, this is better, yeah. I'm
How about now?
Okay, yeah, this is better. I hope all your information later.
Yes, none of the information goes that way. So if it does, I'll just make it smaller. You can come one seat further.
I can see it, but just fine, even before you did that.
Okay, no, that's, so then you have these 1, 2, 3, and these are really configuration things. And so the first one here is, if you have, like one of the tests I did was I had like almost 3,000 URLs that I needed to feed my test, right? Or I had a set of hospitals that I needed to kind of schedule meetings or appointments with. Or I had I have to log in with 100 different users. That I cannot, I can, hard coding it is the worst way to do, or the worst thing to do. So what you do, basically, you have a CSV file that you feed it, you feed your system, and basically it will grab it and run it. With every iteration, it will grab that new username, password, and apply it and go through the test with it. What's up?
Would you mind showing how you actually add all those configs to like a brand new test that you start?
Oh,
So that
okay.
people
So
can see.
your test plan element, which the moment you create a test, so for example, you create new. Okay, so let's cancel. So when you click new, it basically creates one entry here. It's called test plan. And I showed you that you can rename that test plan to anything. I renamed it to load test. I can name it here as, just for example. So now my test plan is named example. Unless you click away from it, it's not gonna update it. So now I want to add config elements. I go to add, config, and you see the CSV, the HTTP header manager, HTTP cookie manager, all these. Then you add them, and then it gets listed. This one is really for feeding your test with any kind of data, and you can add multiple ones. You don't have, you may have 2 different CSV files. You can use one of them, and this, I want to save this for the future because it gets hairy, or you can use one CSV file that has multiple, data that's comma delimited, and you can feed it that way. Or you can do multiple tabs. So anyway, I'll stop there. Now, as far as your cookie manager, you can choose to clear your cookie with every iteration, or you may not choose so. In one of the tests, I needed only one user, and that user creates a cookie. So what I did, basically, I ran that once, and I did not clear the cookie, and the user lasts for 60 minutes, so I can run my test and finish it, because my test is not going to be 60 minutes, and it was done. So, but best case is, it's really case by case, but make sure you always clear your cookies, you clear your cache, and you can then set the cache limit here, how much you want to cache of the system. So, so basically, this way, you're not serving yourself, because this uses Chrome driver, you're not serving yourself from cache, you're actually pulling fresh data from the server. If you do not do this, your results are wrong. You did not stress the system, So please do it. Now, this is called thread group, and this houses your pages, your API calls, your journey pages, meaning like you have a couple of pages that you hit that mimic the user journey, so we call it journey. So you put your pages under this. I called it web because it's a web app. I want to show you two different kind of testing, web app testing and API testing. So under here, you see in the thread group, this is where you go and you say, I want what number, how many users I want. So I want 50 users, and I want those users to, like I want to reach that 50 in 60 minutes, 60 seconds. And then I want to run it for 10 times. I do not recommend this way. What I usually do, I set it to forever, and then I hit a scheduler. This is when I run it 4 hours, by the way. So removing that. And I go with 900 seconds, that's 15 minutes. Usually a good load test is run 12 minutes, 15 is good, is better enough, or is good enough. So by the 10 milestone, you have load tested the system. You take it 5 more to just make sure that it is sustainable beyond the 10 minutes. So that's the rule I go by, 900 minutes, 600 is for load, and the rest is really to see if it is going well. I incorporate this with other tools. So basically, I have other performance tools like, you can do YSlow, you can do GTmetrix, you can do any tool really, or Lighthouse. You can run it while you're running this, and then you can run it after to see if the system recovered the load test and is now acting normal, So, but let's focus on this. So here where I set my time, and this is a startup delay. So if you have multiple machines, you want to start after 900 seconds, you set it all to 900 and all of them fire up and start. Before in previous versions, you had to set the date and the time for every one of them. And the date is pointed to local machine. And if your local machine is on East Coast versus, because I had some of these, then your test does not start at the same time and you have to redo it. And this one here is delay thread creation until needed. This is something that got added in version 4, I believe. The good thing about it is originally when you ran JMeter, it will calculate how much of your system it needs, and it kind of hugs it. And your system is slow from the get-go. This makes it use your system as it needs it. As it generates more users, it's using your system. So it's not really. So you may be able to sustain a test, and then maybe towards the end of it, your system is super slow, but it's not at the beginning of it. Best case is really dividing the load between multiple machines so you don't have this kind of scenario. Now under here, the same applies to API. There's no differences here. And even the structure. You see, these are my threads, or no, HTTP requests. So every HTTP request is an page. Or can be an API call. So these are the same structure. And under every one of them, I added one listener. This tells me, once it runs, it tells me what was ran, what's the request, what's the response, and whatnot. So it's more detailed. This basically just tells me, hey, you have these many samples, which is users, and this is their average time. This is 90% of them fall under this. And then it tells me your error rate is this, your throughput, which is how many you can hit the system with per minute or per second. And I don't care really about the bytes per second or whatnot. But this really gives you a good table of the health of your run. So same ones are under the API test. Now, what's unique about the web test here is that under advanced, I always select retrieve all embedded resources, which means I'm gonna do just like what happens to the user in production. They get every image, they get every call, they get every content downloaded. And with every iteration, I'm getting rid of that. So, because I'm clearing the cache and I'm clearing the cookies. So basically, I am doing exactly what a user does. That's the one thing that you really need to make sure that it happens. And I will show you how running it with it is going to be showing different results than running it without. And then I use really two very generic, not generic, like some that people use a lot, which is YouTube and Google. And I swear it's only one user. Let's go back. So we're not introducing any load, you know, and it's not forever. So, cool. So then here I list the API that I'm hitting, right? And here I'm listing, and these are dummy APIs, by the way. I found this website that gives you dummy APIs that, you know, will at least give you a success, because I tried to dummy things down and everything, every time I got an error, because I'm trying not to create an issue, but then I was like, good, somebody thought about it and now we have it. So with APIs, really, you just stick the API here. Now, sometimes you don't do a get, you do a post. You see all those? So then you kind of pass whatever value under here, you know, you can add, or you can actually pass a whole bunch of data that you want in here, or you can upload the file and pass it. So basically, but that would be, you know, beyond this conversation. Now, I am disabling the retrieving of all embedded resources, because really there are no embedded resources. It's a simple call that returns like really a few bits of data or kilobits of data. So now let's run it real quick. Let me use the broom to clean everything, and then let me make sure I'm at the one. Yep. Yes. So running it. So I'll show you first the web, then I'll show you the API. As you can see, like I hit Google and screen, so it's a success, and I hit YouTube and screen and success, and that's for the web apps. So you're looking under it, you see like, because I selected retrieve all embedded resources, I have like loads of just different calls. Now, sometimes one of the calls fails. So you need to kind of, as you go through it, you need to notate that. And sometimes as the load goes, and as you add more load, you actually may have multiple items error, you know? So it's very important. This kind of reporting I like, because it tells me, like, here we go. You know, what is my request and what is my response? You know, and it gives me here a summary. So I got a 200, okay, and that's about it. Yep. So now I'm going to go back, and I'm going to advanced. I'm going to disable retrieve all embedded resources. Save, clean, and run. The one thing I did not do is show you how fast it runs, but I'll show it to you. So now, you see there's nothing under. You basically barely just call that page and that's it. You did not download anything. Your numbers here are super fast. You know, you can see that, I mean, just remember these numbers, you know? And let's go back and clean. And let's enable. And let's run again. There we go. The numbers are higher, and they get higher as we hit the system with more, you know? So, and the results include more things. It does not just include the one call that you, to that page that you submitted. Now, luckily, the same time that I was doing this, I also was running this test here, the API one. And you can see dummy API one, dummy API two. And my results, again, super fast. And you can tell from the throughput, yeah, so I can look here. It's 1.5 for the first one, dummy API one, and for 1.6 for the other one per second. So I can push in 1.6 or 1.5 hit a second, every second. Let me just run it with, let me show you the other one real quick. So here, you see the throughput here is 8.9 per second for the first one and 14.7 per minute for the second one, right? So because that it was like really a lot of things for YouTube that you download. Now, if I go back here to YouTube and disable this, and now I'm going to run it. No, let me just wait. Clean it, then run it. Now check this out. You see how it's 1 per second for YouTube and 8.8 per second. So it went from 14 per minute to 1 per second because you're not testing accurately. You're not downloading everything that gets downloaded when a user hit the site. So that's the significance of that one checkpoint or check mark that you need to do. For APIs, really, there's nothing but that call and that response. So you don't need to do that. And for the web, you have your all the data that you ask for to see if you're meeting or beating. The goal is always to meet or beat, unless the client is aware of the degradation that happened with the addition of a whole bunch of assets, you know, or a whole bunch of functionality. Now, with APIs, they have to tell us what's their expectation, you know. So that's about it. Go ahead.
I was just wondering if you were able to type in like an API schema file to JMeter and have that automatically enumerate all your different endpoints instead of putting them in manually.
Absolutely. I don't have like one of my tests was, it involved 51 endpoints and some were desktop and some were mobile. All I need to do is just, you know, using this CSV thing, I loaded the CSV file, then I used parameterized it where I went here and for this URL, for example, I just put some, $sign and a couple brackets and the name of the variable I'm referencing, and then I start pulling. So it's easy, it's doable. People usually get intimidated by it. Parameterization in JMeter is really easy. It's not hard. Any other questions?
Yeah, would you mind just walking through the process of creating a new thread, adding a URL, just step by step so that
Absolutely.
whoever didn't do it before
So,
can do it?
so let's say, let me collapse these so you don't see them. Or, even better, what if I delete them and you have questions? That's fine. So, these are my config things. I'm going to here, adding a thread group. I name my thread group test thread group. And then I go here and I add an HTTP request, which is the page or the API. You know, you can use it for both. So I'm going to use the first one for page. So I'll do www.google.com. If it is HTTPS, let me do HTTPS. And if there's a sub page that I'm hitting, like say, this is just for kicks and giggles. So let's say the sub page is results. So this makes sure that, you know, we're hitting that page, but we're really drilling down all the way to the results page. So that hits the results page. Now, I always retrieve embedded data. Nope, not this one, sorry. Here, embedded data, and I'm done. Now, I'll copy and paste. I call this Google app. I call this API test. And then I go here into my basic, and then whatever API really like analytics.google.com, whatever JSON file I want to get, or really any data I want. So really this depends on your API. I usually copy and paste them, so I don't worry about it. And then you specify if you're doing a get or post. Post involves data, so you need to put some stuff here, some data that you, if you use Postman, you can tell what that data point needs or that endpoint needs. So you grab whatever you submit in Postman and create it in this section here.
Is JMeter able to basically put like fake input in the actual body? Are they able to like fuzz stuff to actually see how the application responds to malformed inputs and?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it can do all that.
So you can do negative and positive tests. But then you're not doing both. You basically
Yeah,
you're basically trying to go through different endpoints and feed it with wrong data, and then you get what kind of you're trying to figure out what kind of error you get, and are the errors accurately mapped? You know, so that's doable as well. Sometimes they tell me, hey, tell us if we have redirects that are not working. So I get the redirects in, you know, the URLs, the beginning URLs in a file. I feed it into a single HTTP request, goes through all of them, and then the results will tell me which redirect did not work. And to avoid searching through logs, so let me now add my listeners. So the tree view or view tree results tree is good in showing you what request, what response you got. So it's good for details. The downside to it is very heavy. So make sure that you either you have enough resources to support that file growing, or turn it off when you're testing. I would turn it off when I actually have reported all the errors I have, and now I'm trying to just stress the site with immaculate number of threads. That's when I use it. Otherwise, just add more resources to your machine or add more machines to your test. Now, the other listener is, I use there's a summary report and there's the aggregate report. The only difference between them is a couple of extra columns. So, and this is where things show. Now, make sure that you browse and save your results in a specific location. Make sure that you name your results accurately. You know, if you don't name them accurately, like if it is average underscore round one underscore desktop, you know, just make sure that you are very organized in your naming convention, because honestly, you're not running it for one time. Do not expect that you run it 3 times. Expect it to be run 10 times or more. Expect people to come back to you 6 months later and tell you, hey, what results did you have? So unless you're organized, you may have to spend another night doing your test, and you may not get permitted to actually run it. And so just get everything really organized, naming wise and whatnot. So that's about it. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. Anybody else? I know it was super clear, so I don't expect a lot of questions. That giggle tells me it was. I did not take it as sarcastic at all.
You mentioned adding assertions. Where are the assertions in here?
So assertions are added to these calls. So you go, see, you can add any kind of assertion you want. I use this one. You get the text response and say, for example, and this is really just touching upon it. Say the title, or there's somewhere in the page has the word, I swear I typed something, my account, right? You run it, it's gonna go hit that page, and then it's gonna tell you that either, you know, it will tell you the result. So you may get in the result, everything passing, but the assertion failing. And then you know that it was your page is not loading the way you think it should load. Or the system is not giving you an error. The system really is given 200 for everything, for any call. Now, to validate that my assertion works, I always add an S or any character. So for the next one, it should fail. If it passed the first run, it should fail the second. If it failed the first one, it should fail the second too, you know? So I always like test it, because what if? So, but assertion really can be a whole lot of more than this.
It's really cool because you don't really have to code anything to add those assertions.
No.
Just-
The only time it's really not coding, you're just using different elements, because and I'm not like going into it, but sometimes, especially in API testing, this API call brings you data that you use in the second API call. So that's when you use some, elements to extract that data and pass it to the other one. That's about it. And that's really the extent of complexity I found. Another complex situation was actually related to web app. It was not related to API. Was with websites that have two-tier authentication. So when you're logging in, you're really not, as a user, you see that you logged in, or you're going straight to my account or your account. Hopefully your account, not mine. But then you see that in the back, as you look at the dev tool, you look like there are a whole bunch of other things happening, and that's when a system is like running 2 different calls or 3 different calls or 4 different calls to get you that authentication or that token or establish that session. Doing it in JMeter, you may have to, so the way I did it once was like, first time you load the login page, the second time where you identify, of course, the user input and the password input. The second time is when you pass those credentials to this system and get that data. The third time is when you pass that data to where they should go to get that session. So it was like pretty complex to achieve, but still achievable. Like you need to understand how your system works and go that way. The risky part about systems that require multiple or that involve 2 or 3 tier to get authenticated is that you don't get an error. You still get an okay, because you're really loading the page correctly. And if you fail logging in, a page still loads, unless you put an assertion that listens to that failure, So that's when assertion comes in handy. If I'm just loading the page, and I'm just saying like, hey, in this area, I'm just gonna pass, if I'm hard coding things, I'm gonna pass username, password. I logged in. I may not logged in, but a page still loaded and gave me 200, and I'm happy, and my test is wrong. But if I put an assertion, it tells me, hey, you failed, dig some more, and the expectation that load testing has to be done, and I'm gonna close at that, because I think that the only screen I left with or slide is really questions, and we're doing it. So the one thing is that load test is better done. It takes time. A week is pushing it, A week is really pushing it. The more time you have, the more creative you get. So, and then you can add a variable at the top for your environment, and that variable is where, like, say you want to test in dev, you want to test in QA, you want to test in perf, that you can point it to different endpoints. So, question.
You were just mentioning logging in and whatnot. Can you show where you would send in the login parameters to do like an authenticated user test here?
Say it again.
So you're talking about,
Oh,
testing.
so it's showing you how to log in?
Yeah.
So basically just grab the login URL, whatever login it is. I think that's it. So say, for example, website.com, and then you pass whatever, you look into your dev tools and see what is being passed, what values, and then you list those values, which is usually username, password. You list them under here, so you add the name and the URL. But that is in simple login. Like, oftentimes I had to go in and do it on multiple tiers, and then with people asking for more than one user and whatnot to be passed, I had to parameterize it where I feed it through.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome.
So basically you you load your file and you mention like username. I know how to spell it. So you add the comma, but there's no space. So say the first column has username, the second column has in your data file has a password. And once you put it this way, then you basically you hooked up your system to that file, and then you pass it to the URL down there that you're going to use that information to log in.
And you just refer to it as the parameter with the
Yes.
braces?
Yes, but the thing is that I have seen cases where login was simple, but more and more I'm seeing more complicated, like a multi-tiered login. And that's because people are more and more like involved in more systems and or like for security reasons. So.
Speaking of security reasons, I'm assuming JMeter doesn't really play well with most web application firewalls and whatnot. So how do you deal with that? When you see that you're getting bad responses from a WAF?
So I'm going to report any response I get, and that's the key for the first research. That's going to be part of my report, and that's what I'm going to share with people, So my assumption is when I hit a site, it's going to allow a regular user to navigate through it. So if I have, like say, sometimes I have to use physical laptops, sometimes I can use our test server to do that, and the reason being is that some of, the clients I work on, they're not on our network. So I am hitting a firewall. So because the test server is not on our network, is in the cloud somewhere, So sometimes I have to be here because I can't access the site from home. Sometimes I can do it anywhere but if I do it anywhere, I need to stick to that anywhere. You're not going to do it at McDonald's, but if you did it at McDonald's, stay at McDonald's and don't switch McDonald's because, you may not be close to the router the way you are in one or the other. I don't support that one.
And then the other question, is there somebody behind me with their hand up or not?
Say it again.
Other question I have is how do you know that you're always hitting the website, right? How do you know you're not hitting a proxy in front of it that's caching you and just serving you cached content, which would obviously wouldn't make your test indicative of real world.
But those are questions that I ask initially. Like, hey, do you have anything that's between me and the site? And can I access the site directly? And if they misled me, I hope they wouldn't.
And are they generally receptive to turning off those things for your tasks?
It depends. Sometimes ITs cooperate with you pretty good, sometimes they don't. And you have to come up with a way to do it. If I have to travel to a client site to do it, I will, as long as that I can expense it. That's key.
Yeah, but I also if that proxy is how it works in their production and you're just hitting that proxy, then that's your test scenario because you're mimicking the production and you're mimicking the real user. If the real user hits their proxy, that's what we're gonna be testing as well. Be
So,
real world.
and that's when I said, I'm not gonna bring it. That's when I said, like, you don't need to always disarm the system because the user is not gonna be disarming your system when they're going in, When you take out all that fluff that protects the system, you're actually testing the system. But you also need to test how the system behaves when all the fluffs are in place. And when I say fluff, I mean like, if you have a load balancer, if you have, Akamai in place, whatever, just make sure that, I recommend testing both because each is gonna bring you results that are key to your team to kind of configure something in the, in your load balancer or like optimize your system some more. And have a way of like handling errors where we can recover. We won't be like totally crashed from the first hit. I had if the time allows again, I had a client where they had 20 servers and they only serve people. So they have a specific time of the year where they open up the sign up for everybody. And then the system crashes after half an hour from that opening of the sign up. And that's because everybody it's a limited number of users that can sign up and get that benefit. And yes, they have 20 node servers, but they kept adding more servers and paying more money, and that did not resolve. So it really boiled down, and that testing took me almost a month, of just like doing it and stuff. And that was like from 10 p.m. to 3, 4 a.m. every night, and then multiple times every night. And then we found out that actually they just needed a slave database in place because their database was really getting hammered. And then the lucky thing is that, with these kind of, I think, I don't know the name of the cloud that they used, but, with that service, you just you pay for what you use, right?
AWS.
Rack server,
Oh,
rack space. Yes. So with that kind of cloud, you just pay for what you use. So you don't. So they added a slave database for that time being, and then when that was over, and it is over within an hour. That's the thing. Like nobody waits till the next day. It's open for 15 days, but everybody comes in the first 1 hour. That's when things go down. It was only adding that, and they could reduce the number of servers. They did not need that many servers. The key was really first adding a patch to their database because there was a patch missing. Second was adding a slave database, and that was it. But then, think about how much they saved. Think about it. They never lost clients anymore, because the moment your system crashes, that's a dollar sign that you're now losing. Because how much time it takes you to recover? Do you have people on call? Mostly you do, but. Is it just a simple kick, reboot, it's gonna work? Do you have to fix things? It's really it boils down to how much prepared you are to handle these scenarios. And you're losing business, that's the key. Anybody else? Yes.
The aggregate report, you were showing a location to save it to.
Yes.
What all is contained in that report, and what's the format for it? Could we look at that?
So it saves as a CSV file.
Okay.
I do not like to look at it as a CSV file. I always load it in here.
Will it also hold on to your settings for all your?
Yeah, you move the columns in the front end because, so you see those, you can move them, anything that's important to you, you can move it,
I mean, does it also save your settings, because you're modifying your tests, your thread groups, and your configurations? Does it save that as well?
But that is part of that's why you name your file that way,
Yeah.
so that you can reference the CSV file that was for average, low, or throttle down, or 3G. I name it according to the test, because all it saves is really with the columns that you're seeing.
It's only saving that aggregate report.
That's my experience with it. Now, you can actually within JMeter, and this is something that you're welcome to explore, is when you can go in and actually, and there's a properties file where you can add more login, more reporting. I have not messed with that, but you can. So, but this serves my end. Mostly, I really use this. So you will need these based on what you're doing, really. But in most cases, you're looking at how many samples, which is users, how much percentage of errors. I go by my average speed, and then I look for throughput. I never care about received and sent kilobyte. So, yeah. But always save it and always name it accordingly, otherwise, and make sure that the next run you run, you name it before you run, because that overrides your file, and then you lost your results.
Oh.
So, and in the newer version, it appends it. It tells you, hey, do you want me to add it to the bottom of it? But then it's already complicated enough for you to go back and then sort out what was this run and what was the other run. Let's keep it simple.
so it's an open source tool. Does it have the ability for people to write custom plugins for it to add their own functionality?
I have not done it.
Okay,
But I know you
Does it
can
exist?
download plugins that will enable you to do more things. Like I have a plugin that gives you better reporting. Not on this one, on my other load test laptop. So I have it, And it's not necessarily I use it all the time, but it's a good thing to have. Like you look at it, if it makes sense, if it makes your report look prettier and more consumable by your client, yeah, why not? Beautiful pie charts and that stuff will be easier than going through dry data, because at the end of the day, all they care about is like, what am I standing and how much am I away from crashing every time people come to my site. Anybody else? Nope. Cool. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Cheryl.